Sandra, do you want that to everybody or just to you?
You can go ahead and do it to me, that's fine.
Okay.
John, I need the details. Don, you had a question. Your question is, there is a person you can email on the, when you log into our CERT store with any questions, and then one of those would be, can you have your name put on it? And I'm sure they can arrange for that, yes. I know we have some people here who are not members of, who are CERT members, but they're not from San Mateo Consolidated. I can send you a merit, so if you'd like one, go ahead and sign it on the chat box. Make sure I have your email address, and you will get one. I'm waving to people who are leaving. All right, there's a few more people here that I'm admitting in. Hello, if you just joined us, this is the Ham Radio Basics class. Welcome. If you'd be so kind as to make sure you're in the speaker view mode. Up in the right-hand corner, you either have speaker view or gallery view. Please choose speaker view for this presentation. And if you'd be so kind as to check in with your name, call sign, and email, you can do it to me privately in the chat box. Please check in using the chat box. Thank you. Okay, so let's get rolling here. So housekeeping things, obviously we just discussed the using the speaker view, upper right-hand corner. Sorry for those that I'm repeating with. I want to show you a couple of quick things. Most of you will have already seen this. If I can figure out quickly how to share my screen with you. Here we go. Hopefully you can see that. We are actually going to try to pull this off, folks. So there is a hybrid, if you will, of CERT that we're going to try to offer starting next week on the 9th. So that is already up for registration. We have people already registering for the course. Also, if there are people you know who maybe need 1 or 2 classes in order to get fully certified in CERT, they can do it this way as well. They just take the topic they need. This happens to be the new CERT curriculum. As many of you might remember, they've been talking for a long time about introducing a new CERT curriculum, updating it a little bit. They have actually done that and is up and running. So this CERT course, which will be online and then hands-on eventually when it is safer and appropriate to do so, is the new CERT course curriculum. So those of you who want a refresher or just want to take a look, you can do that too. So registration is open. The information is there on this flyer via the Eventbrite site that we have. That's also where you can register for all the classes that we will eventually be offering. We are now transitioning our CPR course, our Get Ready course, and our CERT course onto an online hybrid type of presentation. Okay. What else did I want to show you? This is something you should all be familiar with. If you're a member of San Mateo Consolidated Fire Department CERT, you are familiar with the standard operating procedures that have just been revised. If you are a member of our CERT program, I need you to please, please, please scroll down to page 9. That's page 9. Look at the whole thing, but please send me page 9 with your lovely signature at the bottom. Thank you so much. All members should be doing that. And for those of you who have already done so, and a lot of you have, thank you so much. We are getting a lot of them, and we appreciate that very much. On page 10 of that same SOP is our activation procedure, the process under which we would activate. And this includes all of the ham radio, the primary ham radio frequencies for the 3 cities that we serve. These are the ones you need to be familiar with. And that might be helpful tonight as well. All right. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to share with you, if I can find out how to do that. This is covering all my stuff. I think a lot of you are familiar with the CERT store. We have finally got a CERT store up and running. If you're getting my newsletters, which come out once a month, the September one will be coming out later this week. But the CERT store is up and running, so please take a look at that. The ones that are available now are embroidered, so everything has the CERT logo embroidered on it. And take a look and see if there's something there that you want, and some teamwear so we can all look like we're all one team. All right. I'm going to stop sharing now and introduce you to Michael Radovancevich. Michael is one of our neighborhood leaders. He is a longtime CERT member. He is also the co-founder of FC Aries and very active in that as well. He is a amateur radio extra. Those of you who know, there's a few levels of FCC licensing when it comes to ham radios. You start as a technician, you can move up to general, and then you can move up to extra. So Michael's going to give us a nice foundational course today. I think you'll all learn something from it. I know I always do. And take it away, Michael. Thanks again. Michael, if you're speaking.
Michael's muted.
That you are sharing your screen successfully.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Gotcha now, thank you.
All right, awesome, awesome. When I was sharing my screen, I could not find my mute button, so hopefully I can get everything to work in the right order here. So do you guys see a single slide?
Not now.
No, you're no longer sharing your screen.
All right.
Yeah.
You know, I'll get this right eventually here. All right, let's try this.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
And then this.
That's even better.
Okay, and we got one slide, right? Not presenter view.
Yes, yes, you
Okay.
are the correct.
Awesome. Okay, so
Everybody make sure your microphones are muted. And if you have a question, make it brief and put it in the chat box. Thank you so much.
all right. Thanks everybody for probably for some of you after spending all day on Zoom, spending another hour and a half with me on Zoom. I'm Mike Radovancevich, W6MPR, and as Sandra said, I'm a neighborhood 4 team leader in Foster City. I've been doing CERT for 14 years, maybe, 15, something like that. And I'm also a CERT instructor and FC Aries founder and current president. So what I wanted to do today was go through an introduction to amateur radio for emergency communication. And we're going to go through a couple of different topics, covering just amateur radio and MCOM in general, and then some basic radio concepts and some setup, bits about communicating over the air, some information about equipment, and hopefully give you guys a good solid foundation in amateur radio for emergency communications. And I just want to make sure I set expectations properly here. We're going to be talking about amateur radio for emergency communications. There are all sorts of other interesting uses for amateur radio, such as things with contesting and all that. We're not going to be going into any of that, and it's primarily going to be focused on short distance communication, stuff that is suitable for a local or perhaps regional response, like response in the Bay Area, or maybe the peninsula of the Bay Area, or maybe even more narrowly the bayside or coast side of the peninsula in the Bay Area. We're not going to be covering all the other very, very many topics. So there are plenty of other good organizations out there that cover that. San Mateo Radio Club is one of those. There are others. So if you're interested in other topics, there are plenty of good places to go, but we're just going to be focusing on MCOM today. So I'm going to get going here. As Sandra said, if folks have questions, please just put it right into the chat and she'll relay those to me. And we'll do our best to get those answered. So, a couple things that I want to cover, with MCOM and all that is, one is, why is amateur radio interesting for emergency communications, and what is ARIES and RACES, and a little bit about served agencies. But before I get there, I just wanted to kind of talk about what is an emergency. So emergency has multiple meanings in this space, and topic here is kind of amateur radio for emergency communications. But when we're on the radio, we're actually using emergency in a very different sort of meaning. And I want to kind of differentiate between a couple of things. You know, technically, an emergency is an immediate threat to human life or important property. So when someone is talking about an emergency on the radio, that's what they're talking about, something that requires immediate attention to prevent harm to a human being or some very significant property damage. Now, I want to contrast that a little bit with a disaster. We're all talking about, you know, with CERT and everything, response to disasters, managing disasters. And a disaster is a situation that poses an increased level of threat to life, health, property, etc. But, you know, not all the situations in a disaster are emergencies. So I just want to kind of draw those distinctions here. So, you know, why is amateur radio interesting for emergency, quote unquote, communication? Well, you know, one of the things that amateur radio provides for people is self-sufficiency. It doesn't rely on any shared infrastructure. You know, you have your cell phones, they require a telephone network and cell towers to be operable and have power. Telephones, obviously, a lot of folks don't use landlines anymore, but, you know, when those were more prevalent, they required working infrastructure and you know, power in some cases to function. They did better than the cell towers do today, but still there was a finite amount of battery capacity left. They're very, you know, amateur radio is very flexible. There's a wide range of frequencies available. There are many different modes. We're going to be focusing primarily on voice, but you can send data or even, you know, images, TV, slow scan TV can be sent. And it also gives people a lot of range. You can go across the street or across the planet. It's a very accessible medium for communication. The lifetime license is free. Generally, you know, you'll get hit up for about $50 to $100 with different testing fees and some, you know, books to prep for that. But the actual license is free. All you have to do is tell the FCC you're still alive every 10 years and where you're living. And then the equipment for amateur radio starts in about the $25 range. We'll see examples of where you can go well beyond that, but there's a lot of flexibility. And, you know, the key point here is that, you know, there's going to be a lot of need for us to have eyes and ears in different locations and communicate quickly across wide geographic areas. And we can't rely on 911 or the first responders to be in the middle of all that communication. We're the eyes and ears of our, you know, different municipalities when it comes to disaster response. And the best way to get that information up is through a network of trained and self-equipped amateur radio operators. So those are the basics of, you know, why amateur radio is interesting for emergency communication. As you guys have seen, you know, with the fires in the Santa Cruz Mountains just recently, a lot of the infrastructure is gone. Whatever towers and things they have are gone. I saw a lovely little shot, I should have probably put it in this presentation, of a cell tower that had a security camera that was pointed down at the ground in order to keep people from, you know, stealing the wiring and copper and all that. But it happened to record the fire passing through part of Bonnie Doon, and, you know, it looked like a furnace down there. Everything was completely engulfed, and then the camera died shortly after that. So the infrastructure in a lot of those areas is gone. The only thing that's really going to work is something that's self-sufficient and is portable. So that's one reason why we're all here today, to learn about emergency communication, and specifically that aided by amateur radio.
Michael, there was one question in regard to the licensing, and that is, so in 10 years, do I have to take another test, or do I simply, as you say, let the FCC know that I'm still alive and kicking and I'd like to be reviewed for another?
That's basically it. Once you pass a particular level, as long as you stay, keep the FCC aware of where you are and all that, you maintain that certification for life. You know, there isn't any retest. I think there's a period of time if you don't, you know, stay active, if your call sign expires. I think at some point they have you redo those particular elements for your license to get that back. But it basically, if you keep it unexpired, you can hang on to it forever. All right. Let's see. So let's talk about ARIES a little bit. I'll use that term. It's a national organization, and it's Amateur Radio Emergency Service. It was established by the American Radio Relay League back in 1914, and really it provides training and organizational structure for volunteers like us who provide ham radio communications during emergencies. And they have a lot of great training material and support a lot of local organizations such as Foster City ARIES and SCARIES and several other peninsula organizations that are focused on MCOM. And they also will intervene aggressively when things like, restrictive ordinances and things prohibit or try to prohibit amateur radio operators from having antennas and things like that. They've intervened in a lot of cases, and they lobby Congress to keep the frequencies open and available for use and reduce all these restrictions and covenants that tend to keep people from having antennas and things. So it's a good organization, provides a lot of support for the practice of emergency communication by amateurs, and so we're staunch supporters. You might hear another term called RACES, and that's the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. And what RACES is essentially sort of the civil defense radio service. It's essentially, I guess to put it nicely, it's the way that the government will, under certain circumstances, be able to restrict general amateur radio communication and only authorize certain individuals to use those frequencies to save resources and provide an additional level of control. So RACES operators are generally previously registered with the government, and they can provide emergency communications. Other amateur radio operations might be suspended or restricted in certain circumstances. And generally radio operators are enrolled with their local government agencies, and it's under their jurisdiction and authorization that they would operate in such an event that general amateur radio operations would be suspended. So we hope that stuff like that doesn't happen, but just something to be aware of that exists. You might hear the term served agencies when we talk about amateur radio and emergency communication. So a served agency is any generally government organization, or sometimes nonprofit organizations such as the Red Cross, that has a relationship with an ARIES group. And these relationships are sometimes pre-negotiated with a memorandum of understanding. Sometimes it's just an informal understanding that, hey, there's these ARIES guys and they have radios and they can come and help us out if we need it. Sometimes it's much more formal. And ARIES works under the direction of a served agency. So when we're talking about ARIES and doing this work as ARIES, it's generally under the direction of a served agency. We work at their direction to fit whatever role they have that is loosely categorized as communication. Now, a lot of us are dual members, so we may be a member of an ARIES organization. We're also members of CERT, and the rules are a little different. So Sandra just showed the SOPs, and it has all the formal rules for CERT operation. If you're operating as a CERT, those are in play. If you haven't been activated as a CERT and are not operating as CERT, but are a member of an ARIES organization, you may be called upon to provide emergency communication outside the CERT context. So it's important that you keep tabs on how you're activated and who you're working for and how all that works. Couple of recent things. This is an old presentation, so please forgive me. I haven't updated this for the latest disasters. Recent activities where ARIES was activated include, hurricanes down in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico. There was a lot of ham support down there. And then, more recently, wine country. This is relevant today as it was back then, but there have been a lot of support from ARIES members and CERT members for shelter operations, logistics, communications, in particular between hospitals, and also providing excess communication or auxiliary communication when some of the primary means are no longer available. For example, when the cell service goes out and folks can't dial 911, they've been relaying messages and things like that. So that's the last of the general overview. Sandra, are there any questions on like general topics before I dive into basic radio stuff?
No, Don wanted to point out that ARRL has announced that on August 28th, so I guess that just happened, FCC is reinstating the $50 license renewal and upgrade fee. Is that
reinstating the $50 license upgrade and renewal fee?
right?
Oh, all right. Awesome. So forget what I said about free. Is that for GMRS or is that for ham radio?
It's ham, all class.
All class. So to renew, it's $50.
Correct. For
Wow.
10 years.
Okay. Are they charging it the first time?
That's what it says right now on their website.
All right. Okay. Well, I stand corrected. I did not get the memo on that one. Wow, $50. All right. That's unfortunate. But thanks for the news. I'll have to dig into that. Okay. Hopefully they didn't change anything else that's in my presentation. Otherwise, this is going to be all obsolete.
Just keeping track of all the disasters is hard enough.
Yeah. Wow. All right, so let's start talking about some basic radio concepts. So we're gonna cover radio bands, simplex, duplex, repeaters, squelch, and tone, and a little bit about allocations and band plans. So a couple things about the radio bands. You'll hear folks referring to various different radio bands and things like that. Sometimes it's a little confusing. So a couple rules of thumb, they work for me. Hopefully they'll work for you is, if you might hear frequency and you might hear wavelength, and the two are related. So if you have your frequency in megahertz, essentially it equals 300 divided by your wavelength in meters. So for example, if you have, 147570, that's the primary frequency allocated to Foster City. That's 147570 megahertz. If you divide 300 by that number, you get approximately 2. And so translating that to English, that means that 147570 megahertz is in the 2 meter band. You might also hear, terms like VHF and UHF used. And those also are, names that refer to the different frequency bands. Some of them are a little old. You have, HF, which is high frequency, and then there was, VHF, which is very high frequency. Then you have UHF, which is ultra high frequency. And, the frequencies that kept on getting higher and higher, and they kind of ran out of all these wonderful adjectives to put in front of things. So, you can look at some of this stuff and you can say, well, why is the low level stuff, down around 30 megahertz, why is that high frequency? Because when there's such higher frequencies out there. And it's just, this is historic, and electronics and capabilities have advanced since they were first named. So these radio bands that I'm talking about, they're governed worldwide by the ITU, and it's an international organization that regulates the overall spectrum and coordinates among the various regulating agencies within different countries. So countries will regulate the spectrum locally. The spectrum is 3 hertz on up to 3,000 gigahertz. So there's a lot of territory in that. Each band has particular characteristics that make it suitable for different applications. So in our case, the primary bands of interest for MCOM are high frequency, HF, VHF, and UHF. And I'm going to go a little bit into difference between all those. So HF, this is kind of, when you think about, a lot of the stereotypical ham radio operators sitting in front of a big, vacuum tube driven console and turning the knobs and dials and picking up static and then occasional Morse code and some, echoey sounding voice from the other side of the planet. They're using HF to communicate, and sometimes very long distances. So HF is 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz. That's about 100 meter wavelength to 10 meter wavelength. It's used for long distance communication, and what it really does is it uses the Earth, the ionosphere in particular, to bounce radio waves from a transmitter on one side of the planet to a receiver on the other side of the planet. So it's highly variable depending on the time of day and the solar activity. It typically requires longer antennas, but you can get the signal very, very far. You can actually bounce the signal all the way around the planet if the conditions are ideal. It is, again, very dependent on the sort of space weather that we have, and the time of day and the season and the level of solar activity. So it's a lot fussier to make a good connection on it, and they're a little more tenuous, and again, designed for longer distances. What's awesome about HF is that all you require are, radio in one location on the planet and a radio in another location on the planet. No other infrastructure is required to get from communication from point A to point B. And again, those points can be really on the other opposite sides of the planet. So, it's a miracle that you can communicate that far with sometimes very little power. But again, it's highly dependent on, a lot of conditions, and folks who are really good at this, especially if they're able to, if they do, some folks can do this portably. They'll set up a wire. They can, basically pull signals out of anywhere and communicate with practically anything, understanding what the right conditions are and how to set up their antenna. But again, it's very finicky and not that applicable for more of our regional work. Most of our work that we do is going to be done in the VHF and UHF bands. So VHF 30 megahertz to 300 megahertz. That's again 10 meter wavelength to 1 meter. It's mainly line of sight, maximum range about 100 miles. That is, for example, where the primary frequency for Foster City is 147.570 megahertz. That's in the 2 meter band. There's also a UHF band that is used a lot, and that's in the UHF technically is between 300 megahertz and 3000 megahertz. It's the 1 meter to 10 centimeter range. And that is entirely line of sight, ranges 30 to 40 miles or less. And because of high frequency, it's better able to penetrate buildings and foliage for indoor reception. So you'll find, there's some activity on the UHF band. A lot of for example, a lot of business radios operate on that. Police radios will operate up there, and not on the ham bands, but adjacent to them. And then the GMRS bands are all up in the 460 to 470 megahertz range. So because of their characteristics, the radios allow for more mobile operation. They generally have smaller antennas. So, for example, something like this is a dual band antenna for VHF and UHF, and that's portable versus, a wire antenna that I have on my HF radio, which is 84 feet across my yard. So that's not very portable. So again, this is where we're primarily spending most of our time. If you're really, really interested in digging into the bands, there's a lot of detail on that. This is an ARL document that kind of details out where the different license classes can operate, the different ranges. And again, you go from, sort of the very, low frequency, very long wavelength communication up through, that's up through kind of where we are in the 2 meter range and 70 centimeter, where we primarily operate. So there's a lot of spectrum here that's allocated for amateur radio use. And, there's some conventions on who can operate where and what kind of traffic you can have. So for example, on this, there are sections of spectrum that are designated for use for data transmission, Morse code, things like that. There are other sections which are open to more general usage for voice and other things. So it's a lot of this is by convention, some of it is by rule, some of it is regional. So it's really good to have access to a good band plan for the area you're in, understand what the different criteria are. If you cross international borders, the rules change. If you're within a certain distance of the Canadian border, for example, some of the 70 centimeter band is not accessible to you where it would be, a little bit further south of the border. So if you're traveling internationally, please be cognizant of the local rules, be aware of your licensing, because not all licenses can operate internationally. And also, if you happen to be in, some other countries, they are somewhat suspicious of people with radios and all that. So this was a little more prevalent during the Cold War, but there's still a lot of regions in the world where they really don't want, civilians walking around with radios without a really good explanation. So just understand where you're operating and what works and what doesn't work in those areas. But, we live in the Bay Area, so the rules are fairly clear, and we're going through most of the basics in this presentation. Any questions on amateur radio bands? All right, hearing none. Let's go on to simplex, duplex, and repeaters. So couple things that are very confusing when you first get into amateur radio. You realize that, okay, I have this radio here, and I have another radio over here, and they can communicate to each other, and you think you got to figure it out, right? You push to talk on one, and you listen on the other one, and vice versa, and it's all great. That's simplex communication. So basically, both radios are tuned to the same frequency, and one station is communicating, transmitting, the other one is receiving, and then they can change places. One will transmit, the other one will receive, and you get information going back and forth. So that that's fairly straightforward. And then we get into duplex and repeaters, and things get a little bit more complicated. So the way that repeaters work, a repeater is a radio station that operates in duplex mode. So what does that mean? So a duplex station is one that transmits on one frequency and receives on another frequency. And so why would you want to do that? Well, if you set up a repeater, you can, like for example, on a visible high point, like a tall building or a mountaintop or something like that, you can use that repeater to relay signals between folks that have these little tiny handheld radios. And you can cover a much broader area and have people communicate with these tiny little radios that are maybe producing 5 watts. They can communicate over ranges of 100 miles, sometimes more, with this little radio. And the way that works is you'll have a repeater set up, and it has its frequency. That's the one that you can monitor and listen to. So in this diagram here, the repeater frequency is 147.120 megahertz. And so if you want to listen to the activity on the repeater, that's what you dial into. You listen to that. But there's this cool thing you can do is you can actually transmit on a slightly different frequency from your HT, and that is, the repeater is set up to receive from that other frequency, and that's called the input of the repeater. And then repeater turns around and retransmits that on the output of the repeater. So why would you want to do such a thing? Well, I have this little 5-8 watt radio, and I'm transmitting on that input frequency 147.720, and the repeater, because it's sitting up on a mountaintop and has this big antenna, it'll pick up my weak little signal from down here in Foster City, and then it can transmit that signal on that same antenna at a slightly different frequency, the output of the repeater. But it can transmit it at the full power of that repeater, which may be 50 watts, so maybe 100 watts, and it's coming out of that antenna in that high place, and get a lot more coverage with that signal on that output. So I can transmit a weak signal on the input and have that essentially amplified and transmitted from a much better antenna and a much higher location on the output. And this allows us to communicate over a wide range of distances, and have folks using fairly small radios communicate with each other. So that's awesome. We use repeaters for coordinating activities across the county. OES has a couple of repeaters that are set up that they're either borrow in emergency situations and use to coordinate activities across the different municipalities on the peninsula and coordinate with county. So that's why repeaters are interesting, and that's a little bit about how they work. As I said, they allow folks with suboptimal power to be able to do things. The repeaters themselves, there's a limited amount of space on these tall buildings or mountaintops, and there are only a few repeaters out there. The repeater frequencies themselves, because they use both an input and an output, they're using up more frequencies, more channels, if you will, than a regular radio. And they're generally coordinated. So there's certain ranges of frequencies where you're going to find repeaters. Different regions have different coordinating agencies for who's allowed to have a repeater, and is it a registered repeater or not. And there's a lot of sort of bureaucracy around getting a repeater set up and used. We've had situations also where the repeaters have been set up that are where the ham radio is not the primary, authorized user on that frequency band. For example, our 70 centimeter band, ham radio, amateur radio folks can use it, but the primary user is the U.S. military and radar. So about 10 years ago, there was some Air Force guys making the rounds, kind of helping folks tune their repeaters on all the buildings and ridges around here that were conflicting with one of the radar stations in the state of California. So sometimes, being up high and having a big, strong signal, it can cause problems. So we've kind of been through a little bit of pain and suffering with that, and everything should be fine now. It's just, before you set up your own repeater, make sure you understand what you're doing and what frequencies you're allowed to use and what you're not allowed to use, and whether you need to coordinate it or not. All right. And when I talk about these repeaters being able to reach out and really touch somebody, here's the repeater coverage for the repeater that's up on Mount Diablo. So that's 147.060. With a plus offset and a PL or tone of 100 hertz. And as you can see, the signal from that repeater basically goes all the way from Sacramento and east, and southeast down to Oakdale and Modesto, and all the way down, out to practically the Farallon Islands on the west there, and up and down the peninsula. So that's an awesome amount of reach. You can be sitting on an HT anywhere in that dark purple area and probably get to someone else on an HT anywhere else in that dark purple area. So it's pretty awesome. One thing you will notice, though, is that there is some level of shading by the topography. The ridge line running up and down the peninsula is actually shielding all of coastside from being able to get Diablo. There might be a couple spots there where you can get it, but generally, if you're down below that ridge, it's hard for you to actually see the transmitter and hence get a signal to it or from it. So, any questions about repeaters?
Michael, we did
Simplex,
have one
Duplex?
question.
Yeah, sure.
Asking about if you could explain what a PL 100 hertz is.
Sure, we're actually going to get into that a little bit, but what it is the PL or tone. PL, I think, is one manufacturer's term for it. It was like private line. It's essentially a code that is sent along with your radio signal that will cause the receiver to be able to discriminate your signal versus another signal. And I'm going to get into a really good example of that in just a little bit here. I see it practically where it's used.
We jumped ahead. And then one other clarification on the FCC and the fee increase. It is a proposed fee increase, and they have to have a public comments period before they put that out. So If it's something that interests you, make sure you get into the public comment period of the FCC before they raise the fee.
All right, that makes a little more sense to me, because I haven't heard about any uproar on it yet, and I would imagine there would be an uproar for something that all of a sudden is going to be $50 to get in and stay in every 10 years. So that's good. So write your congressman, write everybody, complain a lot. We like free amateur radio. It's a good thing. The government has gotten more than her money's worth out of all the CERT volunteers running around with ham radios, for sure. They don't need to collect fees that way. That's my, okay, I'll get off my soapbox now.
It's a good soapbox. That's okay.
Yeah, all right. So any more on repeaters and all that? All right, I've got a different critter, a different kind of repeater to talk about yet. So there is a different kind of repeater, and these are crossband repeaters. So what you may have noticed with the other repeater we looked at, both the input and the output were in the same band. They were both, in that case, both a 2-meter band, and that allowed, basically somebody who has a radio that may operate, let's say, only on one band, to be able to communicate. In the old days, before all these inexpensive electronics came out, you would buy a VHF radio, or you'd buy a UHF radio or something like that. Right now, a lot of the radios can cover, 2 bands, sometimes 3 bands. Those are dual banders or tri-banders. So a lot of the initial work with repeaters and all that, to keep electronics simple and keep configuration simple and be able to stay within a single handset, is all within the same band. You can apply that same pattern of interaction across bands, and that has some really interesting characteristics. You can connect a frequency on, let's say, the 2-meter VHF band to the 70 centimeter UHF band. In those cases, they're not using an offset setting. They're just one frequency is plumbed into another frequency. And we actually have an example of this running in Foster City. So the primary Foster City frequency, 147570 megahertz, that's 2-meter band. That is actually repeated through a crossband repeater on 438-500 by a crossband repeater that sits at City Hall, and vice versa. So if you are transmitting on 147570 with a PL of 114.8, that will be repeated on 438-500, and vice versa. If you're transmitting on 438-500, that'll come out on 147570. So we set that up initially to allow us to operate and basically have a good antenna set up at City Hall without requiring an antenna drop somewhere in the building. So you can actually sit on an HT, in the parking lot, and you can have an antenna that's, 50, 100 feet up in the air and has all the backup power and all that, and get in and out. And that was the original purpose of it. We've also found that we're able to take in, when we're doing nets and things like that, we're able to take in some locations a lot more easily on 438-500, and we'll run on our net on 147570, but we can still pick up folks on the UHF side, and gives us a couple of alternatives. There's some dead spots in different parts of the region, depending on which band you're operating in, and this allows us to get around that and reach some folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to be heard. So it gives us a nice resource, so when Foster City Net is operating on 147570, it's also available on that other frequency. So anyway, it's a very versatile thing. We've had folks have set up crossband repeaters in their vehicles for similar reasons. They might be inside of a building. They might be using an HT on a UHF frequency up in the 400 megahertz range. And they've got a crossband repeater set up in their pickup truck, for example, and that's tuned to the Red Cross frequency, so they can actually get on their HT out of the building to a better antenna with more power and get to the Red Cross 30, 40 miles away. So we actually had somebody operating during the San Bruno fires in exactly that mode. So they're very versatile. These are all little tricks you learn when you're trying to set up ways of operating, and you know, it allows us to you know, be a little bit more agile in terms of the handsets we use, and then, you know, actually having access to a better antenna and better power output to get somewhere else. Let's stop there. That may have been a little confusing. Any questions on crossband repeaters or anything?
Let me take a look at questions here.
I can't see people, so Sandra, if I'm putting everyone to sleep, let me know. 'Cause, you know, I'll make some more jokes or something.
I
like
want
that.
everybody to get a nice to stand up. Everybody, hang on. I'm gonna start my video so you can all see me. Okay, see my beautifully messy office. Okay, everybody stretch. Everybody get a nice stretch. Get the stuff going. Okay, you're doing great, Michael. And
All right.
the question is there a distance limit to accessing a repeater?
So if you remember, VHF is primarily line of sight, and you know, up to, let's say, 100 miles. UHF 30 to 40 miles, and so, you know, with the Diablo situation, you know, you've got, you know, distance between Mount Diablo and Sacramento or Modesto is you know, that's the extent of the you know, strong signal reach from Diablo. Now, you will also notice that this lighter purple area goes way out beyond that. So good conditions and good antennas and all that, you can sometimes reach pretty darn far. You also have to, you know, that like up in some of these areas, you're actually getting up into the hills, so you're getting up above all the ground clutter and getting a better shot at stuff. But you know, 100 miles for some of these repeaters is not at all unreasonable.
Awesome.
And that's 100 miles to the repeater, and then 100 miles on the other side of the repeater. So you can go pretty far. All right. Let's talk about Squelch a little bit. So Squelch is actually used to refer to a couple of things. What we're going to talk here about is sort of the audio squelch. So what the squelch control does is it allows you to set the level above which your radio will output the received signal. So when you, let's see here, hopefully I'll do this right. So you guys can all hear that? So if your radio did not have a squelch setting, that is what you'd hear all the time, because your radio would be receiving, and basically it's picking up all the noise that's out there. And sometimes there's signal there, sometimes there's not, but basically it's you know, you'd hear the static, or you might hear some signal, but that's what it would sound like all the time. And, you know, for those of you that remember the, you know, televisions that you would tune to, you know, like turning a little crank and it goes click, 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 and you have the fancier mode, you'd go to, you know, a station without a channel without any station on it, and you'd get all the fuzzy noise or all that, or you can tune your radio. You used to be able to do that between stations and you get static. I mean, those are the ambient natural signals that are out there. What Squelch does, it allows you to set the level that the signal needs to hit in order for your speaker on your radio to open up and for you to listen to it. So if you have your squelch all the way down to 0, and a lot of these radios have menus that allow you to set squelch, and you can set it all the way down, you're going to hear static all the time. Whether there's a signal there or not, you're going to hear static, and you might hear some voice on top of it occasionally, but you're going to hear something all the time. Your speakers will be going constantly. As you raise the squelch setting up, what will end up happening is that it will cut out, you know, the noise and whatever weak signals there are more aggressively, and it has to be a much stronger signal for the radio to open up. So what this does is it prevents you from, one, listening to static all the time, and two, if there is a weak signal and you know, let's say down in San Jose or something like that, that you really don't want to listen to because you can barely hear it, but it's breaking through intermittently, that squelch setting will allow you to kind of tune out that, that weak signal, and you only get stuff that is a stronger signal that's generally closer to you and more of the stuff you want to listen to. So that's a setting you can play around with. I will advise folks to generally err on the side of setting squelch a little bit too low. So that means every once in a while you hear a little buzz or a little bit of noise breaking through. That's preferred to having your squelch really, really high, and then missing signals from one of your team members who's trying to get a hold of you but can't because they're behind a fire truck and they're having problems getting through the water tank and getting all the signal to you. So that's kind of what the squelch setting does, is it controls the signal level above which you need that you need to hit in order for the speaker on the radio to open up. All right, any questions on squelch? I'm gonna go really slow here and ask if any questions a lot, because this is where we have a lot of fun with radio settings.
Okay, so I'm going through the questions now. What's a typical squelch range or setting? I think you addressed that briefly, but you may want to remind. Yeah.
Each radio is different. In the old days, older radios, you would have this radio here is a Baofeng. We're going to talk about it a little bit more later on, but it has one control on it, and that is the volume, and it's on, off, and then volume. A lot of radios used to come with a second dial, which would control the squelch setting, and you could just vary it until you kind of tuned out the intermittent noise and the hiss, and then you were fine. Most radios these days have a digital setting for squelch, and you get that but through the menu setting on your radio. And all different models of radio differ. So this is called a manual. It's really awesome. And and even if you play with radios all the time, like I do, you still need the manual every once in a while to remember exactly how to do something. So I encourage everybody, if you threw it away, they're downloadable online, but they're not optional when you have a radio. They're absolutely necessary, and it's good to have a couple backups. Put one in your CERT backpack. Put another near your desk, so you have one wherever you might need one. But it will take you through the settings. And in this radio in particular, it has a squelch setting, and let me see if I can get to it. Okay, so it's right here. You guys probably can't see it, but it says squelch 5, and then I can go ahead. Whoops. I can go ahead and lower that. 4, 3, 2, 1. If I go down low enough, you can hear it just broke through there because the squelch is really low. So what I would do is I would play with this setting, and then if you're getting a lot of intermittent breaking and a little bit of a hiss and it's bothering you, I would increase it like that one right there. I'd increase it a little bit until you stop getting those very frequently. That's about the right setting. Some days will be better than others, and if you're on 147570 in Foster City at about 7:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, you'll start picking up a bunch of activity from Cupertino, so you might want to bump up your squelch a little bit so you don't get that. So it depends on the conditions, depends on the frequency band, depends on whatever else is on that frequency making noise. Either intentional or unintentional. So I would start with it low and work my way up until you stop getting the squelch breaks and getting disturbed by that. Any others, Sandra? And Sandra, if you're talking, you might be on mute.
No. Somebody points out, keep in mind that if it's a foreign-made radio, the manual may not be the best written manual in the world, but truly they are essential reading, so it matches your radio and you have it handy when you need it.
I found that some manuals, even if they are written by what seem like competent writers, sometimes just the user interface design on these radios leaves a lot to be desired. So they have cheat sheets. There's some folks who actually put together these laminated cheat sheets for radios. Those are really useful. But you know, they won't change the actual radio itself. They're just going to help guide you to how to, you know, what to set where. But become familiar with it. Download manual if you lost yours. Keep a copy with you. All great stuff.
If you do have a question, reminder to just put it in the chat box and I'll relay them to Michael and thank you.
All right, cool. Let's go on to tone. So there was a question earlier about PL. And I'm gonna try and explain this. I've tried a couple different analogies, and they've all failed miserably. But I'll try and do this. So we talked about Squelch, and that Squelch is kind of based on the signal, the level of the signal, the strength of the signal coming into the radio. Tone is used for a couple of purposes, including a different kind of Squelch. Tone is, you know, technically it's a sub-audible tone transmitted with your voice, and it's used to send signals to receiving radios. So as you're on the radio, as you're talking over, transmitting on the radio, there is a tone, kind of like, you know, remember the old touch tone phones, you push the button and it makes a tone. There's a tone like that that's actually transmitted, but it's in the sub-audible range. So you can't hear it. Or most people can't hear it. I've met a couple of folks who said they can barely perceive them. They're able to hear really low level sounds, but they're these, you know, sub-audible tones that are sent, and it's a little bit like a secret handshake with potential receiving radios. I'll explain that in a little bit. It's called different things by different manufacturers. So the technical term is, you know, continuous tone coded Squelch system, CTCSS. That's what we're using. There's another digital version of that called digital coded Squelch, but we're using CTCSS. It's also known as PL, QC, CG, different manufacturers. If you're on GMRS radios, that code that they have you put in along with your channel, that's really referring to a particular tone that is being transmitted along with your signal. And what these tones are used for is they will go ahead, I'll actually get to that in the next slide. Tone system that we use is generally CTCSS, not the DCS, digital coded Squelch, and that's used almost exclusively for interoperability reasons. You have a lot of different radios out there, and to have one person's PL versus another person's QC versus another person's CG versus whatever versus the code on this radio, that can be very confusing and sometimes incompatible. So, you know, we map everything down to CTCSS and then tell people what the equivalents are on their radios. So you might hear reference to something, you know, called TX tone. That's the same thing. That means the same thing. So we're talking about a subaudible frequency that is transmitted along with your signal to other radios. And then, you know, why would you want to use a tone? Well, what the tone does is it changes the behavior of the receiving radio. So we talked about repeaters, and in a lot of cases, repeaters, because they're way up high on these mountaintops and can basically hear a whole lot of different signals, they don't want to be triggered all the time by folks who had no intention of using that particular repeater. And there can be all sorts of different things that trigger the repeater. Basically, it's looking for a signal on a particular frequency. In order to prevent that from happening, a lot of repeaters have set up what they call tone Squelch. Then we're going to talk about this a little bit more deeply in a bit. But they require that tone be set on the transmitting radio so that when it hears the signal, that tone has to be there in order for it to start basically rebroadcasting that signal on the output at a higher power. So that's basically, it's like a key that lets the signal in the door for the repeater, and then the repeater will activate and retransmit. And again, it's used primarily to prevent the repeater from being on all the time based on spurious noise and things like that. you have to kind of intentionally transmit on the right frequency with the right tone in order to trigger the repeater. So outside of repeaters, tone is used to identify a subset of stations on a particular frequency. This allows people to share a frequency in adjacent geographic areas, potentially, and avoid picking up the weaker signals from the other group. And it's also can be used to mute transmissions from stations not in a particular operator's group. So again, that's, if you go to GMRS, this is where those codes come in, right? You'll have different codes set up, and basically you might both be on channel 4, but if one of you has code 5 and another one has code 11, you won't hear each other's transmissions. The reason you're not hearing each other's transmissions is because with the different code setups, the receiving radio will refuse to receive something that doesn't have the right code set up on it. So this is designed to keep people from essentially stomping on each other and a little bit of access control for that radio signal. Otherwise, any signal on that frequency, whether it's legitimate, not valid or not, will trigger a receiver, and then you'll end up hearing things that you don't necessarily want to hear, sometimes from far away unintelligibly. So I was referring to this a little bit, tone squelch. So this is the counterpart to transmit tone. This is receive tone. So this is basically something you set up on your radio saying, all right, I'm going to listen to 147570, but I'm only want to listen to signals on 147570 that have a CTCSS or PL of 114.8 hertz. And that will ensure that you're listening to basically people in our case on the peninsula who are using 147.570 with a PL of 114.8, and you're not hearing folks in Cupertino or elsewhere who are using a different PL. So we end up with problems sometimes when one jurisdiction or one group they have people are transmitting without setting their tone, and then they have problems receiving things and all that. So we generally want people to be educated on when to use tone squelch, and be able to follow the band plan, if you will, for your particular area and have that set appropriately. So I'm going to go into an illustrative example that hopefully will make all this gobbledygook a lot clearer so you understand kind of tone and tone squelch. So these are the Aries and Races groups in the Bay Area using that same 147.570 megahertz. While we have a lot of bandwidth, a lot of frequencies available for ham use, we live in a very large metropolitan area, many people, many folks trying to coordinate stuff. And when it gets right down to it, there just aren't that many frequencies to go around to satisfy everybody. So across the Bay Area, we have different Aries Races groups using that same frequency. So what happens if there's a regional earthquake and everybody wants to operate? Well, one thing we advise people is use the minimum power necessary in order to get your signal out. The other thing we've done is on a county by county basis. Generally, the counties will assign a certain PL to folks transmitting on frequencies in their county. So in San Mateo County, it just happens to be 114.8 is the prevalent PL or tone that's used. That is different than 151.9 down in Cupertino. There's a group up in Marin. I haven't been able to figure out what their PL is, but they transmit on the same frequency. And we've got folks kind of in the East Bay also transmitting on that same frequency, but with a PL of 127.3. And this basically allows us to share that same frequency in different geographic areas and simultaneously use it as long as we keep our power levels down, so we're not blasting over everybody else in the entire region. So this is something that's coordinated. If you take a look at the county, at the sheriff's band plan, you'll see there's a lot of 114.8 all over the place. So here's an example of it. We can see here you've got the Foster City and 104.8, but Half Moon Bay is primarily using the same CTCSS, and Hillsborough is, and Repeaters are a little bit different for a variety of reasons. They require a little more coordination, and there may be some reason why they're not using the 114 decimal 8. But essentially, it's a way for us to coordinate. And for the most part, on the bay side of the peninsula, 114 decimal 8 is the tone that's being used. So that was a lot of stuff on tone and things. It's confusing. It helps to refresh this. We're going to post the slides up. In FC Aries, we have occasional refresher meetings, and so we cover this every couple of years, kind of what tone, squelch, when you should use it, how you should use it. When we ever get back to hands-on meetings, we can do some demos of how all this works and doesn't work, real time with radios. Any questions on band plans and things like that?
I don't have
And
any questions.
tone and squelch. All right. So let's talk about basic radio setup. And I'm gonna go a little bit faster here because this is a little bit more hands-on nuts and bolts stuff, and it generally goes a little bit quicker. So things to set on your radio. So you have your on-off volume. Most radios will have a single dial, clicks on, and then you turn it all the way up to get the volume up. Most radios will support 2 different kind of modes of operation in terms of setting frequencies. You'll have VFO versus memory, and VFO stands for Variable Frequency Oscillator. You don't need to remember that, but just know that VFO is the thing where you type in your frequency and the radio will transmit and receive on that frequency, versus memory, where someone's pre-programmed your radio, or you've pre-programmed your radio, and you end up with nice stuff. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this radio right here says Echo 4 and Echo 3. Those are 2 frequencies used in Foster City. So they have a nice little, alphanumeric name for that particular channel. It's good to have a lot of frequencies pre-programmed. It's bad to be and pre-programmed in memory. It's really bad to rely entirely on memory having everything you're ever going to need in it. So you need to know how to use VFO. And when you use VFO, you're going to be setting frequency. You can set modulation. A lot of radios, these are FM, so there's not a lot of setting you need to do, but you can set, change between FM and narrow FM. You can set the tone and squelch settings that we set. Transmit power. We advise folks to transmit on as low power as possible and only increase it if they're having issues being heard. Transmit power does nothing for your receive. If it's hard to hear somebody, it's not your transmit power, it's theirs, or antennas or position or distance or something like that. And then there's lock, and lock's a very useful thing because sometimes folks put these in their pocket and end up ending up on a different frequency, doing something they didn't expect, and no one can hear from them. They don't hear it from anyone for a while until they look at the radio and see it's on some weird setting. So figure out how to use your lock button. That's very, very powerful. Things to turn off on your radio are almost as important, sometimes more important than things to turn on. So some radios have a bunch of beeps and different kinds of things. They can be quite irritating. They're fun the first couple times you do things, but it's after a while it's just a lot of extra noise. I advise you to turn it off. Generally, we would advise folks to turn off something called Vox. Vox is voice operated setting, and it allows somebody with a headset or some other external microphone to be able to trigger the radio just by speaking. And that sounds cool. That enables hands-free mode. The problem is that when Vox is on, ambient noise, if you're CERT, you're helping people medically, people screaming, yelling, also that can trigger Vox. Conversations with your buddy that you probably don't want on the air can trigger Vox. Going to the bathroom can trigger Vox. So having Vox on is not really a great thing. So I advise folks to manually operate their microphone whenever they can. And then wires on Yaesu radios. Wires is awesome feature that it does something useful with other Yaesu radios, but in general, in an MCOM situation, what it does is it creates a beep and then some silence and clips the first couple of seconds of your transmission, forcing the other person to say, you have wires on, can you please transmit? You forget how to turn wires off, and then you basically have to hold on your push to talk, wait a second or two for wires to do its thing, then speak, because you can only be heard in that case. So figure out how to turn wires off and make sure it's off. There are permanent settings on some radios. More things to set. As I said, when you're doing a simple frequency, you can peck that in. If you're doing a repeater, there are a couple of more things to set. You set the output frequency. Sometimes the radio will automatically pick up the standard shifts and offsets for the input versus the output frequency. But if you have an odd repeater, you might have to set that manually. You also have to set the tone to key the repeater. So those are all things to set. We're not going to be able to go through all that. Setting everybody's radio is different. Hands-on classes are really good for this. But I advise everybody to, get their manual and play around with their radio a little bit. The Thursday night nets that we do for CERT are really great because we're operating on different frequencies every week, and it allows everybody a chance to go in and refresh themselves with their radio and set it up to the right frequency. So if I talk fast enough through the rest of this material, we'll actually get a chance to do that and get us onto 147570. So we're ready for the net on this coming Thursday. Any questions on things to set on your radio?
I'm not seeing any questions at this time. I'm just making sure nobody's typing. Nope, I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. So communicating over the air. I'm going to talk about call signs and back and forth, radio nets, message passing, and then maybe get your hands on exercise. I'm not sure, but we'll try. So call signs. As you guys all know, who've completed your ham license, your first set of elements for your technician, FCC requires stations to self-identify every 10 minutes and at the end of their last transmission with their FCC call sign. When we're operating in response to some sort of activation or something like that, supporting a served agency, we may be assigned a tactical call sign, and we'll generally be using that occasionally with our FCC call sign. So a tactical call sign will identify generally a location or a purpose of the station. For example, Division Alpha, Rec Center, Command, Foster City EOC, Rover, things like that. But they will be used in conjunction with your FCC call sign, generally at the beginning of your shift and at the end of your shift. And then occasionally you should repeat your call sign along with your tactical, just quote unquote for the record. So that's basics about call signs. I remember call sign is generally defining a role or a location or a purpose of the station. Generally it's best to do that versus using Sam or Mary or Jane or things like that, because the actual operators in those locations can change. But the Foster City EOC is still the Foster City EOC, whether W6MPR or KS6QWL is operating there, it's still the Foster City EOC. So basic back and forth on the radio, set the radio to the desired frequency, listen for other traffic. If none is heard, push the talk button down for 1 second, begin speaking, and then continue to hold PTT until, 1.5 to 1 second after you're finished speaking to avoid clipping. One of the things that happens is, for folks who are just starting to operate, is they will either come on the push to talk late and clip off the beginning of their transmission, or they will come off too early and clip off the end. So push and hold, talk, stop talking, let go, and hold the radio vertically. All these antennas are vertically oriented, and they work best when all the antennas have the same orientation. And then speak generally across the microphone. A lot of these radios, the microphone is here on the front panel. So speak across it, not directly into it. If you speak directly into it, you'll sometimes end up saturating the mic, and it's going to actually distort the sound to a great extent. So Sandra, are folks allowed to speak on here, or can they unmute themselves if they want to?
Can unmute themselves if they want to.
Okay, KI6QWL, can you unmute yourself?
This is KI6QWO.
All right. So we're going to go a little bit back and forth, just kind of give folks the idea of how to do this. So KI6QWL, this is W6NPR.
This is KI6QWO. Go ahead.
KI6QWL, I'm heading over to logistics to get new batteries.
Copy that. You're heading over to logistics to get new batteries.
Affirmative, W6NPR. So, the basic back and forth here is, thanks, Karen. The basic back and forth here is you call out to the station you're trying to get a hold of, and you say who you are. And, that basic pattern continues that way. You get their attention. You don't do it the reverse way, saying, hey, this is W6NPR, I'm trying to get a hold of KI6QWL, because folks are used to that kind of request for their attention right off the bat, and if it's not really directed at them, they're going to ignore it and they might miss the message. If you want a really good example of back and forth that kind of follows this pattern, you can listen to air traffic control. They're really good at this thing because they follow this religiously almost, so it's a really good to listen to, and especially when they get busy, you can kind of see the pace and the brevity that they use. It's only the specifics that you need to have. So that's a little bit of basic back and forth. A little bit about radio nets. We can each talk to each other, but radio nets are really, really important when we're trying to coordinate amongst groups and also deal with the scarcity of channels. So we have a limited number of channels that are available for us, and in something like an earthquake in the Bay Area, you're going to have many, many people trying to communicate on the radio. In order to kind of control that, we use radio nets, and it allows some structure to the communication on the radio. So there are a couple primary types of nets. One is a directed or formal net, and that's controlled by a net control station who organizes and controls all the activity on the net. The other one is an open or informal net, and this is typically when you have a group with, acting alone and they're just trying to coordinate their own activities, but it's sort of a peer-to-peer type situation. Nets are used for a variety of different purposes. You have a resource net can be used to locate and assign equipment or operators with specific skills. You have tactical nets that are used for primary on-site communication. So tactical net, for example, you might be on a GMRS, FRS channel operating in a building with your CERT team and just using that to communicate amongst yourselves, because you've got to coordinate the activity of multiple people in a small local area. Traffic nets are used for passing formal written messages between served agency locations or between other nets. For example, when we're going from a division post in a neighborhood or ERD up to the EOC, we're doing a traffic net and essentially passing traffic from that particular division on up to the EOC and coming back down again. And that's where we're using the formal messages and relaying the messages and making sure that they were received properly and all that. So a couple of different uses of nets. So when people run nets, sometimes stations may be asked to check in or out of the net, or there may be a formal roll call process. Multiple organizations such as FC Aries operate weekly nets to exercise equipment and skills. So every Tuesday evening at 19:15 local time, that's 7:15 p.m. for folks. We'll do a net. We rotate net control and kind of just check in and make sure everything's working. And it allows us to do a lot of things, understand what works where and when in terms of radios, antennas, keeps things in working order. And we're going to also do that with CERT this Thursday at 7. In a directed net, net control is responsible for opening and closing the net and managing the communication flow. Any questions on nets before I get to message passing? All right.
Question, sorry,
oh, sure.
question. Net is basically an agreed upon frequency was the question.
Yes. So it's basically, you know, at this place and time, we agree to get together and communicate for this particular purpose. So, you know, FC Aries does a net on Tuesday evenings at 7:15 on 147.570 with a PL of 114.8. And, you know, it's generally, it's published ahead of time. Now, you can operate a net on any frequency and that's available to you at any point in time. You know, you generally would, you know, good protocol and good manners dictate that you check to see if anyone else is using it, and that you announce the net and the purpose of the net and all that. And generally, people will respect that there's a net going on and take their traffic elsewhere. But in a lot of cases, these are predetermined frequencies, either you know, Tuesday at 7:15, or, you know, in Foster City, FC Aries, if there's an earthquake or some big disaster, we're just going to get onto 147.570 and start counting heads and seeing what's up. And our neighborhoods do the same thing. Neighborhood 4 will get on, you know, FRS, GMRS channel 4, code 4, and start to, you know, just communicate, share some information. You know, wait in case of CERT, wait for activation if that happens. So you don't need to be activated to get on a net and see how things are going. So if you think there's a reason to get on your normally assigned net frequency and check in, by all means do so, because there may be a bunch of other people out there waiting for someone to get on and say something. So be the someone. All right. Message passing, I probably should have done this with the other one, but I'll just cover it quickly. Message passing again is, you know, we need to pass more formal messages on the radio where all the details must be transmitted completely and accurately. So we actually will do classes in this and how to transmit messages and make sure that somebody, you know, the receiving end gets all the data. This is quite important, especially when you are asking for things or passing important information. Like, for example, let's say you needed a particular medicine in a medical treatment area because somebody is out of their, you know, life-sustaining medication. You want to make sure you get all the particulars down and the, you know, the name of the pharmaceutical and all the appropriate facts, and get that transmitted up properly and received properly, so that, you know, somebody can go find the right stuff for the individual and pass that back down and get that delivered. So formal messages are for resources, you know, formal messages around activation or deactivation, those should really be passed formally. Things, casualty reports, you know, damage assessments, those are all formal messages that go back and forth. So there's a whole entire classes on that we could do sometime if folks are interested. So I'm going to go very quickly through key bits and pieces. This part alone could, you know, take several meetings, but just kind of cover the key bits of the equipment. So there's a lot of equipment available out there. Basic MCOM setup can be had for less than $100. Hardware cannot make up for experience and skills. You've got to practice. You got to use your radio, even if it's an inexpensive radio. You've got to get out there and practice and use it. You know, you can spend literally tens of thousands of dollars on radios, but unless you use it and are familiar with it, it really doesn't help much. Most useful radios are for us are these, you know, least expensive radios are these HTs. Look for dual band, VHF, UHF, removable antenna, so you can upgrade the antenna if you need to, lithium ion battery. It's good to have an option to take AA or AAA batteries. Headsets are really, really useful. Having it programmable with memories is awesome, and 5 watts or more. Nice to haves are dual receive, dual watch capability. For example, these can receive 2 different frequencies, excuse me, at the same time. That's really useful if you have to monitor multiple frequencies. And then something that has actually been very useful in a couple of cases, water resistant, waterproof. We did a Silver Dragon exercise a couple of years ago in the rain and found out that some of the less expensive radios that are not water resistant and waterproof don't really last the day in the rain. So all important things. Popular radios, the Baofangs, you know, they have the UV5Rs and something like this, which is the UV82HP. There's also Yaesu's, the FT60 and 70 are quite popular, and you have major vendors, Bofang. They tend to be inexpensive, most frequency agile of the bunch, and actually have decent menus on them. Yaesu and ICOM are kind of some of the old standbys along with Kenwood. So you know, if you get something from a reputable vendor, you're generally going to be okay. But there are a lot of like off-brand, off-market things out, you know, kind of, you know, gray market things out there. Just be careful if it sounds too good to be true. Antennas. Most of these radios come with these rubber ducky antennas. Upgrades include, you know, high gain replacement from Comet or Diamond. Basically, it's a similar kind of antenna, but it generally has better performance. Roll-up J-pole. These are, you know, sort of like the old twin lead TV antenna wire that is repurposed to be an antenna, or mag mount antennas. You'll generally need a pigtail adapter to attach this to an HT, so you can put a mag mount on your car and be still sitting inside with your HT that has an external antenna. That's really useful. Something else that we found was quite useful is having some paracord and a tennis ball, and you can use that with these roll-ups, get them up in trees and get the signal out a little bit further. On the power side, you should consider getting extra rechargeable battery packs. They have adapter kits that allow you to take regular batteries in there. That can be useful. Charging stands, of course, they come with the radio in most cases. Sometimes you can get a 12-volt adapter for the charging stand or for the radio, and then of course larger capacity batteries or solar are good if you want more operating time. One of the things to look at as you start to get experience and do more radio operation is building out your own go kit. At a minimum, you should have a 2-hour go kit, and that's stuff you need for sustenance, as well as, you know, the radio oriented pieces of your gear in addition to your regular CERT gear. Things that folks, you know, don't think about but are really useful are, you know, have your own ICS forms and you know, notebook, pens and pencils, because while there's stuff in the trailers will not be available for some period of time. Flashlights, you might be operating in the dark, and it's hard to write good notes if you're in the dark. A copy of your FCC license and driver's license, some water, snack, you might be stuck out there for a while, and then kind of any needed stuff. So kind of the normal stuff you'd have in your CERT backpack, with, of course, all the extra little bits for the radio. I have some more material on mobile radios. These are a nice upgrade. I'm not going to really get into too much detail on that. The price is higher, the power is higher. You can use these at home mounted with a, you know, external antenna, or you can use it in a vehicle. We find them very useful, and they give you a lot more reach. Let's see. So any hardware related questions? I'm going to next get into a little bit of CERT logistics, and then we can try, if folks want to go a little bit longer, we can try getting on 147570.
Checking for messages. John, who's one of our other extras, recommended having a connector adapter kit, which connects your radio to someone else's antenna.
Yes, those are very useful. I don't know if I have a picture of one here. I don't think so. But yeah, there's some beautiful adapter kits which have all the different parts you need. They're not cheap, but you can connect anything to anything with them practically. All right, let's talk a little bit about kind of the way this is envisioned to work. Talk about neighborhood command communications. So we have our neighborhoods or ERDs, and there's, you know, typically a division supervisor and staff there, and their field teams out doing their thing. You know, within that neighborhood level or ERD level, you'll have radio net that's typically coordinating the activities of the teams out in the field. And then, you know, field teams will have their radio operators, and then there'll be, you know, somebody back at the command post who is running a radio net, and that's typically going to be on FRS GMRS. That's the way we've been doing a lot of that. At least in Foster City, I know in some other areas there, you know, more hills involved, and you get a little bit more power to get out and reach somebody. But that's kind of the playground for FRS GMRS is kind of at that neighborhood level, and then working your way up from that. You know, in our case in Foster City, we have the the EOC that we would be coordinating these CERT activities out of, and the CERT unit leader there. And in order to communicate with that, we would have at the division post a radio operator, generally on a ham radio, and they would be interacting and communicating with other ham radio operators at other, potentially at other division posts, as well as a net control operator. And there would also be a radio operator at the EOC. And essentially this allows us to relay messages from the division, from the neighborhood or ERD level on up to wherever the EOC is. And then, the structure actually repeats on up, if you get to, get up to the county level, you have the San Mateo County operational area, and they're running their own nets stacked on top of that. So it's, nets communicating through, other nets communicating through other nets on all the way on up. And this, we can go up to the federal level if you want here, but that's beyond the scope of this whole endeavor. So anyway, that's kind of how it's supposed to work. It keeps the different kinds of information stratified. You have tactical stuff, more tactical stuff going on down at the neighborhood radio net, and then more summary information, request for resources that are not available at that neighborhood level coming up to the EOC. And then if the city has issues, they're actually able to, via a variety of means, including amateur radio, get out to the county and get their requests taken care of. All right. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick plug for Foster City Aries. Foster City Aries is an organization in Foster City dedicated to supporting emergency communications. We have been supporting CERT for a long, long time. We have about 20 members. Most are CERT trained. We rotate through as net control operators. We do a bunch of different exercises and trainings and stuff like that. So if you're interested, if you have a ham license, welcome to join. If you don't have a ham license, want to learn more about it, you're welcome to join. We had been doing meetings at the rec center every month. Now we're doing online Zoom meetings. Karen, should I send it into info@fcaries.org if they want to get some more information? You can also look at the website, fcaries.org.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, cool. And then again, weekly nets, Tuesdays, 7:15, 147.570 megahertz with Simplex with a CTCSS of 114.8. So I have a little more information, but I'd like to open it up to questions. And then I'd like to, for folks that have radios right now and want to kind of try and check in on this frequency, we can do that. But let's take questions first and let folks who don't want to play with the radios go on their merry way.
Okay, I'm just checking here for any questions. I don't believe there are any outstanding. So thank you. Reminder that the San Mateo Consolidated CERT Net is this Thursday. This particular one, we do it once a month. So this particular one, we're going to do it. Each city will have a net at 7 p.m. on their own primary frequency. So if you go to the SOP and you find page 10, it'll be the page on our activation procedures, and it will include all of the frequencies, your primary frequency for your city at 7 p.m. But from in future months, it was reminded to me that other people in other cities may want to visit and check into each other's nets. So we'll try and stagger the times so people can check into other cities as well. That's my plan.
All right. Thanks, Sandra. I had, before we were kind of rotating through the various cities, and I did not realize that we're going to do all three simultaneously this Thursday. So that should be very, very interesting.
It will be very interesting.
I don't know how you're going to do it because you're going to have to juggle like a couple different frequencies.
No, I'll have one person who'll be net control in each city. So we're all good there.
All right. All right, so I'm gonna stop right here with my prepared material. For folks that want to stick around and have their radios, we can try and do just have folks check in on 147.570, and I guess before Karen and I kind of try and collect people on that frequency, maybe we want to just see a sort of a virtual show of hands who in the chat is interested in trying this out. All right, I got Sandra. All right, cool, Sandra. All right. Just if I get just an I'll do it from a couple of people, then all right.
Yes,
Awesome.
we got a few. So just either respond, put your thumbs up or wave or let us know. But
Okay,
I have a
great.
few people on who are saying
We have more than a couple, so that's awesome. So I'm going to start with this. And the thing is, I don't know the level of everybody's experience, and I won't be able to kind of hands-on help you with your radios. Sandra, what were kind of like the predominant radio types that folks pecked in there? I think you had you did a little census.
I'm taking a look here. I would say Yesu was the first and Baofeng with a very close second.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to make some big assumptions here, and my apologies to folks who have not done this, but I'm going to assume that folks have played with the radios a little bit and might know how to set up a frequency. So we're gonna do that first. We're gonna kind of ignore the tone, if you will, and we're just gonna get everybody on the same frequency and try and get in on 147.570 megahertz. So I don't know, Karen, if you can still hear me, if you can get onto the base station, because I can't get on there right now.
This is KI6QWL on the base station.
Okay, all right. So she's on frequency. So folks, if you want to turn if you either have it pre-programmed for, if I've done your radio at some point, then it might say Echo 1. If it doesn't say Echo 1, it might say FCY-N. Or FC1 or something like that. If it doesn't say that, then you're going to have to go to VFO mode. And so for folks, there are a variety of different ways to do it. Sometimes there's a VFO/M button or a V/M button. For folks who have the Baofeng UV82HP, oh, yep. Okay, there's the VM on that Baofeng. That's a UV5R. So you can use that if you have one. If you don't have one, if you have the UV82HP and you don't know how to get to VFO, I believe you hold down the menu button and you turn the power on, and then you'll see numbers instead of channels, or vice versa. So for the rest of you who have Yesus and other stuff, I don't have enough exemplars to right in my hands right here to show you, so I won't be able to do that. But let's start by having everybody try and get on to 147. Of course, it helps if I hit the right buttons. 570. And I don't know if you can see that. I've got 147.570 on my screen. There you go. Sandra typed that out. And all right, so we're gonna try and get folks to check in. And let me go through here. I can actually cheat on this. I've got Edward McCabe. And actually, Karen, can you see the chat from where you're at? I'm not sure if she can.
Well, Mike 6, Mike 8, Whiskey. I think I've got a radio check. I got you.
KI6QWL, this is W6NPR.
Yeah, Michael, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now. I was just wondering, can you see the chat window from where you're at?
No, I can't, but I do have the list of the people that Sandra said who had radios, or at least replied with radios.
All right. So why don't why don't we do this? I'm gonna go through, there's folks who said that they wanted to participate, and I'm just gonna read off the names, and if they can transmit, you can, see if you hear them.
Copy that. Then when they reply, I'll just say whether or not I heard them.
That sounds good, W6NPR. All right, let's start off with Edward McCabe. If you're on frequency, please try transmitting.
I know Ed has a new radio. He's trying it. So let's.
So Ed McCabe, did you try to transmit?
Nothing heard over here. So Karen, if you, I'll do the roll call, but you can do the nothing heard since you got the better antenna.
Copy that. Nothing heard.
All right, Gina Loxon.
Nothing heard.
Wing Poon.
Thank you, Wing.
That's one. Awesome. Sandra.
Not heard on the radio. Nope, wasn't heard.
All right, Karen didn't pick you up on that one. You're also inside in probably a public safety building, so that's not a great place to transmit out of with all the concrete and steel. All right, let's go Kathy Keys.
LCR, can you hear me? I read you loud and clear, Kathy. Terrific.
All right, I see Gina tried transmitting. Let's try one more time with Gina.
Gina, put your radio up to the camera and let's see what you've got.
Nothing heard.
Gina, if you can hear me over the computer, put your radio up to the camera so we can see what you have.
All right, 147570.
Could that be a PL issue?
I can't hear anything from the radio, so I'm in an apartment, so I'm not sure if it's the reason.
All right, Gina, can you hear me on the radio? Okay, so Gina wasn't able to hear on the radio. Edward, why don't you give that another try? Okay, I heard a little bit of a tail end. Karen, did you hear anybody transmit?
No, there's nobody transmitting.
All right, so we're having all sorts of normal radio fun, everybody. So this is how it goes until we get everything worked out. So I think what we can try and do is maybe set up a separate session. I don't know, Sandra, if you want to do this, I'm totally willing to, set it up so we can get folks to work through this on a radio type by radio type basis, and maybe we can work through it. But in the interest of time tonight, maybe we're going to take a break now and get something rescheduled for some later point in time.
So something by all Jesus, all bell phones, so on like that. Is that what you're thinking?
We'll take a census going in, and then I'll try and prep with the manuals and all that, and we'll kind of debug it on a case-by-case basis.
Terrific. Thank you.
All right, last call for anyone who wants to try and check in on the radio.
K6 DAW, you copy? Kilo 0, Delta Yankee. No traffic for the net. K6 DAW, you copy?
So, could you go a little bit slower? Because I'm trying to write down the call sign, and the first call sign is cut off. The second call sign, would you need to repeat it?
KJ6 DAW. Delta Alpha.
Oh, it doesn't come through. Maybe it's not having tone on it. Try it one more time.
KJ6 DAW.
Maybe that time I did hear it because you didn't have tone set, so I put the other one on it, and I could hear you through that.
All right, I think there were a couple more in there.
Too fast. Could you go slower? Okay, I can hear you. I just can't take down your numbers.
All right, last call. Anyone else?
Nothing heard.
Yeah, I just got a squelch break on that one. All right, so you know, we all need a little bit of practice, and again, some dedicated time to set this up. It's always a lot of fun the first couple of times, and you know, working through a couple different radios here. So I appreciate everybody kind of hanging out and trying to give this a try. Got the net on Thursday night, and as I said with Sandra, we'll schedule some time to go over sort of a hands-on session, radio by radio, and get things debugged. And then usually after we do that, you know, things work for a while until you change your settings and you got to go read your manual again. But you know, that's the fun of this whole thing. So Sandra, do you have any more for tonight?
No, and for our first, you know, CE meeting the first time through, thank you all. You guys are all troopers. Look for an email from me, or a few emails from me, obviously. You'll be getting a survey on this class. You'll be getting a reminder for Thursday's ham, and you'll be getting a merit, something from SMC Consolidated, a merit for having attended tonight's class, because this counts towards your active status in CERT. Okay? You guys are all awesome. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. W6 NPR clear.
Have a good night. Be safe all.